want to express my passion for one particular watchmaker in history. That's why the Marine Chronometer, and we've got two over there, and I'll show them in full detail. And during the story of the Marine Chronometer and the particular watchmaker John Harrison, for me he is so important because it is a specific time in the evolution of watches as we recognize them today. And so today is Marine Chronometer, real fine timekeeping, but it's the story of the evolution of timepieces. And we've got an array of timepieces from around 1700 up to now. So with all examples, I would like to show you all the small things that changed over the years, over the centuries, and what that small changes has meant in the further evolution of watches, timepieces. So we got some excellent stuff. So it's about two stories molded to one. So we start the journey with these two very simple movements. So we start at the beginning, real simple, how a simple watch works. The difference between a mechanical movement and a quartz movement. There are two major differences, and you don't have to be a watchmaker to be able to tell that a quartz movement is technically less challenging than a mechanical movement. And hey Makaya, hi there. I would like to tell just a tiny bit over the mechanical movement. We are going later on talk about quartz, because when you know how it works and when you see the high quality quartz movements, this is not one of them, but there are high quality ones, quartz is amazing as well. All watch lovers who say, well, it's just a quartz, they really don't know what they're talking about, because quartz movements is quite breathtaking if you got the quality ones, and this is not one of them. But then again, this movement is just about 100 times more accurate than that movement. So there are definitely some positive sides on quartz. Our emphasis today is more in mechanical movements, because that is where our real passion lies. If you understand the basics of a mechanical movement, then you will see that hardly anything has changed in the past 200 years of watchmaking. Same as a car, the internal combustion engine. It's got pistons, cylinders, an ignition, well, carburetor not really, but you know what I mean, and an exhaust, and not too much has changed for the last, in cars, 120 years, and same in watchmaking. The basics were already there 200 years ago, and it's only more refined, but the basics is just about there. Here, an well, very old, dingy pocket watch. There's no crown on it, as you can say. Well, there's a lot of exceptions, but you can say roughly it's before 1850. After 1850 they had a crown here, but it's a key wound movement. For the last 200 years there is a main barrel, same here, 4 wheels, an escapement and a balance wheel, same here. Main barrel, 4 wheels, an escapement and a balance wheel. With the most expensive movement or a lot of complications like the ETA Owen is working on, every single time. The real basics is just a balance wheel, 4 wheels, an escapement and a balance wheel. The real innovation for the last decades is mostly in the use of new materials, but the layout and overall design, our story of today with the marine chronometers, and is how do we got here? Hey Danger and Gaze, good afternoon. How do we get from watchmaking that's been with us, or timekeeping, since 14th century? Those were clocks. But watches that are portable timekeepers, that's it. What was the evolution of portable timekeepers and why? And that's the story I would like to tell today in this special chronometer stream. Because as always, design follows function. Same here. And there are loads of different ways to walk the same path. And that's exciting for me. Because during the stream today, we go from the very thick 1700s until the very thin 1820s. There's really not that much time in between them. And I will show you how they did it and why. And that's beautiful. That's so interesting. Very simple. Hardly anything has changed in the past 200 years. The layout and even the design, it's directly recognizable as a mechanical watch movement. And I will tell you a bit more about the function within a mechanical watch, because that's going to be very important during our adventure of looking inside the marine chronometers. What different problems did they have to solve in the quest for portable but very accurate timepieces? And I would like to show you a very small clip, it's just a few minutes, about timekeeping through the centuries, and I think it's quite interesting. So please have a look, and I'll be back in just a few minutes.
13.7 billion years ago, it all began with an explosion. Everything, including time, was born in a split of a second. Time as we know it today is measured with a system developed by the Sumerians, later used by the Babylonians. This is a sexagesimal system, which basis is 60. But where does this come from? It is possible to count up to 12 by using just one hand. The thumb is pointing at each section on a finger, and there are 3 sections to each finger. 4 times 3 is 12, and that makes a dozen, and the other hand can count in dozens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 12 is 60. But it's not the only thing that makes 60 such a special number. It has 12 factors, and this is a smallish number which can be divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 with no fractions left. We use this system to measure time, angles and geographical coordinates. The earliest timekeeping devices were reliant on the sun. Egyptians divided the day into 14 parts. 10 daytime parts, 4 twilight parts, 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening. And with a shadow clock they could keep trace of time quite precisely. However, these clocks were useless on overcast days and at night. The first implements that did not rely on celestial clues were the water clocks. The earliest description of a water clock came from an Egyptian pharaoh. Although it only measured hours, water clocks were still the best solution yet. Plato, the famous Greek philosopher, created the first alarm clock by developing a water clock. As the water built up in a jar, it blew a whistle that woke him up. Because water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, later it has been replaced by mercury, which freezing point is minus 38 degrees Celsius. In 520, a Chinese poem by Yu Yanfu mentioned a clock which was a candle capable of measuring time at night. King Alfred the Great, who lived in the 9th century, used a special device with 6 candles. Each were 12 inches high and made from 72 pennyweights of wax, and was able to burn for up to 4 hours. Therefore, every inch represented 20 minutes, and 6 candles lasted for 24 hours. Although the origin of the hourglass is unclear, it is believed that they were introduced to Europe by a monk called Liutprand. Some believe that the Egyptians were the inventors of the hourglass. But one thing is for sure, it has been used on medieval ships for navigational purposes. For example, in 1522, when Magellan travelled around the globe, he had 18 hourglasses on his ship. In Europe, the first clockmakers were Christian monks. A man who is known as Pope Sylvester II built the first clock in the 11th century. These timekeeping inventions became very popular around the 14th century, and they were mainly used in churches and cathedrals. Galileo Galilei was the father of science, and he invented the telescope and also discovered the moons of Jupiter. And he contributed a lot to the evolution of the timekeeping devices with his experiments on the pendulum. He realised that the regular swing of a pendulum can be used to regulate a clock. It took 50 years before finally the first pendulum clock was built by a Dutch mathematician. This was a giant leap in the precision of timekeeping devices. The first pocket watch was invented by a German locksmith. It still hasn't got a minute dial, as the accuracy of this watch was around 30 minutes per day, but it was portable. What is a pendulum for a clock is the balance spring for a pocket watch. This invention belongs to the same man who built the pendulum clock. The balance spring made them accurate to within 5 minutes per day. This was the dawn of the accurate timekeeping and the revolution of the watchmaking industry. In 1904, a Brazilian aviator asked the famous watchmaker Cartier to make him a wristwatch. A few years later, the First World War came, and it changed everything. Aviators and soldiers were the first men who wore wristwatches, simply because it was more convenient to look at a wristwatch rather than take out a pocket watch during a battle. Quartz crystals and its piezoelectric ability made possible to create the most accurate timekeeping devices in the 1930s. But how does it work? When a quartz crystal is exposed to electrical charge, it resonates at a certain frequency. This is more than 30,000 times per second. The electrical circuit measures the quartz frequency and controls a motor which drives the gears to the hand. Up until this point, quartz was the most precise timekeeping option. However, nearly 40 years later, the first atomic clock has been built, and a new time standard has been set up. But what is an atomic clock, and why is it so precise? The atomic clock uses the cesium atom to measure time, and in 1967 it was formally recognised as the new international unit of time. 1 second was defined as 9,192,631,770 oscillations of the cesium's atom resonant frequency. These special clocks can keep an accuracy within a second in a few million years' time. So, do you know what time it is?
So I thought it was such a nice clip to see all the different kinds of timekeeping through the centuries. Well, this is still the basics of every mechanical watch being used today. And there are some problems with that. If you wind it, in here there's a huge spring, I will show you in a moment, and that is supplying all the force and the power in the movement. And you can see here, that's the click, and that keeps the ratchet wheel from returning. So more power, holding the power, more winding, holding the power. Very simple design. Then there is the gear train. All the red dots are rubies, actual ruby, a very hard material, and those are bearings. So this gear train runs as smooth as possible. Yeah, and a rule of thumb, just about, that the more rubies they are, the better quality, because it's running more smoothly, and that's beneficial for the accuracy. So yeah, more rubies, and that's why they're always mentioned. 17 jewels, 17 rubies. So there's the power source, the gear train, and here is the escapement. And the escapement usually is the piece that says tick-tock in any watch. As you can see here, that piece going back and forth, and that wheel has got a strange shaped teeth. Do you see that? Well, that's the escape wheel, and that's the pallet fork. And I've got a model of that over here. Well, I keep it like this so you recognize its position. This is the wheel with the strange teeth, escape wheel. This is the pallet fork, and this is the escapement, because every single time one teeth escapes. And you'll probably hear the tick-tock. This is the escapement, and this is the Swiss lever escapement. And all the red parts are rubies. So here you can see they are on both sides. So 2, 4, 6, 8. There are 4 here. So that's 12. There are all over in the watch. And there are two here, and you can see here the impulse jewel, or the D shape, doesn't come in pairs. It's only one single ruby. So that's why with normal hand-wound movements it's always an uneven number, because there's only one impulse jewel, or D shape. They opted for rubies because diamond is too hard. You need diamond to process diamond. And with rubies it's easier, because with diamond you can always process rubies. And a hardened steel pivot, like here, the pivot in a movement, has got a hardness 7.5. So ruby is always harder than the hardened pivot. So ruby is hard enough, basically that. And because it's synthetic ruby, it's always the same quality. So an excellent material to make the bearings.